It was a cold, foggy evening in the quiet town of Ravenswood. The streets were empty, and the only sound was the distant ticking of the old clock tower. Detective Arthur Lane sat in his cozy office, sipping on a cup of tea, when the door creaked open. A young woman, dressed in a lab coat, rushed in, her face pale and her hands trembling. "Detective Lane, you must help me," she exclaimed. "Something terrible has happened at the laboratory." Detective Lane, known for his sharp mind and calm demeanor, gestured for her to sit down. "Take a deep breath, miss. Dr. Emily Carter," she said, sitting nervously on the edge of the chair. "I work at Ravenswood Laboratory. Last night, our head scientist, Dr. Harold Whitmore, was found dead in his office. The police think it was a heart attack, but I'm sure it was murder." Detective Lane leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What makes you think it was murder, Dr. Carter?" Dr. Whitmore was working on a top-secret project, a formula that could revolutionize medicine. But yesterday, he told me he suspected someone was trying to steal his research. And now, he's dead. Detective Lane grabbed his coat and hat. "Let's take a look at the laboratory." The laboratory was a large modern building on the outskirts of town. Inside, it was a maze of glass beakers, bubbling chemicals, and complicated machines. Dr. Carter led Detective Lane to Dr. Whitmore's office. The room was neat, except for a spilled cup of coffee on the desk and a few papers scattered on the floor. Detective Lane examined the room carefully. He noticed a faint smell of almonds near the coffee cup. "Did Dr. Whitmore have any enemies?" he asked. "Not exactly enemies," Dr. Carter replied. "But there were a few people who were jealous of his success. Dr. Richard Black, for example. He's always been competitive with Dr. Whitmore. And then there's Sarah Miller, the lab assistant. She was recently fired by Dr. Whitmore for making too many mistakes." Detective Lane nodded. "I'd like to speak with both of them." Dr. Richard Black was a tall, stern man with a sharp nose and piercing eyes. He greeted Detective Lane with a cold handshake. "I heard about Dr. Whitmore's death," he said. "A tragedy, but not entirely surprising. He worked too hard, always stressed. Did you have any disagreements with him?" Detective Lane asked. Dr. Black hesitated. "We had our differences, but nothing serious. I respected his work." Next, Detective Lane spoke to Sarah Miller, the former lab assistant. She was a young woman with red, puffy eyes, as if she had been crying. "I didn't kill Dr. Whitmore," she said, before Detective Lane could even ask. "Yes, he fired me, but I didn't hold a grudge. He was a good man." Detective Lane noticed a small burn mark on her hand. "What happened there?" he asked. "Oh, I accidentally spilled some acid in the lab a few days ago," she said quickly. "That's why Dr. Whitmore fired me." Back in Dr. Whitmore's office, Detective Lane pieced together the clues. The smell of almonds suggested poison, likely cyanide, in the coffee. The spilled cup and scattered papers indicated a struggle. And the burn mark on Sarah's hand, could it be from handling the poison? He decided to test the coffee cup for traces of cyanide. As he carefully collected a sample, he noticed something under the desk, a small crumpled piece of paper. He unfolded it and read the scribbled words, "Meet me at the lab tonight." "I have proof." Detective Lane's eyes narrowed. "Dr. Carter, did Dr. Whitmore mention meeting anyone last night?" Dr. Carter shook her head. "No, but he did seem nervous all day." Detective Lane called Dr. Black and Sarah Miller back to the lab. "I know what happened," he said. "Dr. Whitmore was poisoned, and the killer is in this room." Dr. Black scoffed. "This is ridiculous. I had nothing to do with his death." Sarah Miller burst into tears. "I didn't mean to. He was going to ruin my career." Detective Lane held up the crumpled note. "Dr. Whitmore found out you were stealing his research, didn't he? You laced his coffee with cyanide to silence him." Sarah collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "I just wanted to prove myself. I didn't want to kill him." With Sarah's confession, the case was solved. Detective Lane handed her over to the police, and the laboratory returned to its quiet routine. As he walked back to his office, Detective Lane couldn't help but think about the dangers of ambition and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. The laboratory puzzle was finally solved, but the mystery of human nature remained as complex as ever.